I'm Mike Fechner from Consulting Werk. I'm very enthusiastic about the topic of using AI tooling together with OpenEdge. It's a great combination. It works much better than many people that haven't tried it think it would be trying. Might have been different a year ago or just half a year ago, but where we are now, beginning of 2026, it's really working very, very nicely. I've been using Windsurf as an AI developer tool now for almost 2 years, and I'm still using Windsurf most of the time as my, well, let's say, primary developer tool. But I'm trying out the others every now and then, and for different tasks or just to keep up with them. I need to put the title of the webinar a little bit right. Exploring AI developer tools for OpenEdge. Most of the tools that I'm going to be talking about are not specifically for OpenEdge. They are, let's say, mainstream tools. VS Code, GitHub Copilot, Windsurf, Claude Code. None of these tools have been specifically built for OpenEdge, but they just work very, very well with ABL code, no matter whether it's new class-based code or whether it's old legacy procedural TTY code, 30, 40 years old. That really doesn't make a huge difference. ABL code is very easy to read, very easy to understand for humans, and so it is easy to understand for AI too. I do even believe that sometimes ABL must be easier to understand for AI than JavaScript or whatever one of these languages with just infinitive nesting of curly braces and round braces and arrows and whatever, because we have words that actually have a meaning. But that's just my opinion. Good. We at Consulting Werk, we support our customers during modernization of OpenEdge applications. So it's the main business that we're doing, taking legacy applications, moving them to the future. We support our customers with technical expertise, but we also provide tools that help along the way. The Smart Component, we have a developer framework that has supported many modernization projects already. Not going to talk a lot about the Smart Component, but we'll be touching some of the features here every now and then, but mainly just as a use case. Yeah, the tools that I'm covering in this presentation, and some more deep than others, are the AI-enabled IDEs like Windsurf, VS Code, with Copilot, Google Antigravity. I could extend the list much longer if I would have had more time. I probably would have invited our web developer. He's a big fan of Cursor, which is also a fork of VS Code, and he says Cursor has really great support for debugging during web application development. I think that's very specific. I haven't taken that tool into consideration for this. Devon is a browser-based development tool that we're using here since middle last year. Claude Code and Mistral Vibe are command line-based utilities that can generate and modify existing ABL code. Foundation for solid ABL language support is the OpenEdge MCP connector for the ABL. That is a tool that Probus has released a couple of weeks ago. I think mid-January or something like that. And especially also AI-enabled IDEs that are based on VS Code. They are the ABL language support there is based on the Riverside OpenEdge ABL extension. I'm going to briefly show that a little bit, why that's important. So if you're in one of these IDEs, and I'll talk about the AI features in this meeting, not so much about the core ABL language support. Like human developers, the AI as a developer will make mistakes. It's very valuable that you get immediate feedback about compile errors and stuff like that. And that is all based on the OpenEdge ABL extension developed by Riverside in France. And since summer last year, commercially sponsored by Progress Software. And what that brings, it brings configuration of your development environment, everything which is required for the compiler to correctly compile your code. So that starts with the ProPath and, of course, database connections and features like that. The OpenEdge extension for VS Code manages ABL background runtimes, province.exes or province32.exes or _progress.exes, which perform the compilation. And what that means is when I'm in a code and I just type some nonsense here, I'm getting, I'm supposed to be getting, that's the demo effect, supposed to be getting immediate compiler feedback. I'm going to restart the editor. Maybe there was a network hiccup or so that did lead to the language server no longer being operational. And I'll get back to that in a second. Good. So when we talk about AI-enabled development, we're actually talking about Gen AI, the form of AI that is great in generating text documents and programming source code is a text document. For us as developers, we get a lot of features while we're writing code, and it starts with more intelligent proposals while you're coding. I know many Progress developers that are still using the app builder or procedure editor, so would be happy to have any form of code completion when you type a database table name, press period, you want to see the fields. The intelligent proposals that you're getting with Gen AI get far beyond that. They learn from the style of code you write and just assume that when you're doing something similar, your next step is going to be similar to the previous next steps. The more powerful feature is chatting with these tools. You give these tools an instruction through chat. It's called a prompt, and you tell it to write something. Or you ask it to explain code. You ask it to generate a diagram of a flow between different procedures. You ask it to refactor code. Refactoring code is taking existing code as an input and make some changes to it, simple changes, or turning old style procedure code with a mix of UI and business logic into class-based backend code that could be the foundation for a backend for web applications. These tools are very great at understanding our code, and that's really the foundation for any reasonable change that we're going to make to the change. So they understand the programming names, they understand block concepts and loops and error handling concepts. They understand the statements. They understand the difference between procedural Progress code and class-based Progress code. They can have understanding for frameworks and what frameworks do and what you don't have to do with the programming language, and so on and so on. They can have understanding what the database schema, so all the stuff which is the foundation for writing serious code. The AI-enabled IDEs that I'm showing in this meeting now are all based on VS Code. There are certain AI features that also work in Eclipse, but my impression really is that with the rise of VS Code and AI-based development tooling, that was really the end of Eclipse. You can use Windsurf or Codium and Copilot extensions in Eclipse, but they don't play that well. And all this modern tool is really going in the direction of VS Code. In VS Code with various extensions like Claude Code or Mistral has extensions that work in VS Code. VS Code has the GitHub Copilot built in, which is a very powerful AI coding agent. And there are forks of VS Code like Windsurf, Google Antigravity, or Cursor, which have taken the open source code base of VS Code. And they say they've done that because within the framework that VS Code is, without any modifications, they couldn't be as powerful as they want to be. It sounds a little bit like they had to break out of a cage that Microsoft has defined with the design of VS Code. So the ABL support in VS Code and these forks, like I said earlier, it's based on the Riverside extension OpenEdge, where you have the project configuration, where you define your database connections, propass, startup parameters, and so on. And that supports what didn't work so well in my quick test earlier. Compilation of ABL source code. It has the OpenEdge debugger built in. It does code completion based on database and field names, based on statement structure, based on widget handles and the properties and all that stuff. Apple and Data Dictionary are integrated in the way that you can start them from there. Riverside officially supports this extension for original VS Code only, but it works well in Windsurf, Antigravity, and probably all these others. One of the really nice things is the release cycle of this OpenEdge extension is pretty fast. I think every couple of weeks there's a new major version, and sometimes multiple times a week there's a new pre-release. And you can always use them regardless on which of the OpenEdge versions that are there on the list you're using. I mean, you could also use all the versions in between, but assuming you're on one of these, you're either still late with getting away with 11.7 or you're on one of these three supported OpenEdge versions, I hope. And that's really great because developers which are using Progress Developer Studio and Eclipse with 11.7, they are port on a very, very old version of Eclipse where none of the AI features would even remotely be available.
Yeah, so along with the Riverside basic extension for ABL support, we're using other extensions. One is Cable for linting ABL code, so verifying that ABL code complies with coding standards that we define directly in the IDE, and that's very cool because when the AI agents generate code within the IDE and the linting kicks in, the AI agents are able to correct themselves immediately. We have control of the rules that we want to apply. There's some rules with parameters and so on and so on. We're able to execute unit tests from within the IDE. There are, to my knowledge, 2 plugins or extensions that support execution of ABL unit tests from Herring or Wayfair. Baltic Amadeus has released a plugin which is quite cool that's able to format ABL code so that statements line nicely and so on. And we have developed an extension that allows you to control PassOE from within the development environment. So the first AI-enabled editor that I want to talk to is Windsurf, the one that I use almost day in, day out. I have been using the last couple of days a little bit more VS Code and feel, well, I don't feel there's such a huge difference between the two anymore as it was a couple of months ago. So maybe I'm be switching to VS Code or staying with Windsurf. I don't know. It depends on the development of the tools that's going on quite quickly. So what is Windsurf? The Windsurf IDE is a tailored version of VS Code. Earlier called Codium. The name change was beginning of the year. We're using it since March 2 years ago. And the reason why they stopped doing a VS Code extension and built their own tools, they said they need more control about what they can do in the IDE, what they can access in the IDE, and so on. It provided really great results in code completion after only a few days of using it. So this tool has never been built with any knowledge of OpenEdge in mind, and the Progress MCP connector for ABL wasn't even being thought of, and yet it was able to give me really cool code completions. Understanding ABL code is done well, very easy. It has access to our framework source code. It has access to the application that I'm developing. so that there's a lot of code to look at and just learn from existing source code. And what it does is, well, when you start typing code, so in order to get this, you just type code and then you wait. And whenever a block that has an input parameter in a method that has an input parameter that sounds like it could be a list of something, a curl list of something, and I name a variable I count, then you see this block, this proposal. It's assuming I want to start with num entries and do a loop through the num entries, which probably in many cases is true. And I can just accept that by hitting the tab key. Here I'm writing another method, process order, with an order number, and it's assuming that the first thing I want to do in this method, but it would work with procedure as well, is that I want to define a variable that holds our class that represents orders. And then I probably want to use this. So the gray text is text that's being proposed, and when I hit the tab key now, it's going to be accepting that code. And then I probably want to filter for order numbers by the input parameter, and if it's not there, raise an error. So all this is code that it's just like 2 seconds faster than I am, and always giving me these proposals. So here's the Gartner Magic Quadrant. So that was the autocomplete feature of Windsurf. I'm going to talk about Cascade in a slide or two. Windsurf, the company, has been acquired last summer by a company called Cognition, which is also a pretty young company. Most of these AI companies, probably with the exception of Microsoft and Google, are relatively young companies and existing only since 2, 3, 4, 5 years or so. Windsurf and Devon are 2 different developer tools now owned by the same company, and these 2 products are slowly but surely growing together. And we started using Windsurf with the autocomplete feature, and that's what was there 2 years ago. And sometime during last year, we switched to more and more using the Cascade, the chat feature, where we do not rely on weird driving the code generation, and we're getting some support with more or less helpful proposals. We're changing that into, we're instructing through chat messages, through natural language instructions. Hey, Cascade, write me something that does this and this. That's actually the way more powerful way of interacting with the AI. One thing that in the beginning was a little bit disappointing when I understood that, but when you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. Autocomplete and Cascade are using 2 completely different engines in the development environment. Autocomplete needs to be fast. I do not want to wait for 10 or 15 seconds for my autocomplete proposals. If I want to wait for that long, I could stay in Prox Developer Studio and wait and hope for proposals there. No, if I want it really fast, you need to make a compromise in what knowledge it puts into your proposals. Autocomplete is just based on my existing code and learning from what I did recently in the IDE. The chat interface, the prompt-based interface, that's optimized for precision. You can use it to develop pretty large pieces of code autonomously or do refactoring tasks. And there, if I write a 2 or 3 or 4 lines prompt and it takes 3 or 4 or 5 minutes to reply to that, most of the time it's gonna be faster, and the more I want from it, the faster it will be compared to if I would be doing it myself. Cascade can then take other tools and information into account, like MCP servers and stuff like that. So that's now a sample. Create me a procedure, get order statistics in the demo folder that receives a customer number as input and returns the number of orders and the average order total. This requires going through the order lines of each order. And I'm actually not sure whether I would have had to put this piece here in the parentheses there, because whenever you think, hey, that is common sense, you could assume that the AI has this common sense like a human developer would have. The next 2 things are follow-up prompts, but we'll see that in the video. So within the IDE, so that's the tailored version of VS Code. I've used the bottom right, the chat field, to put in this prompt. And it's going to look for the tables and fields of the Sports 2000 database. Then, yeah, it's now thinking and doing, and in Windsurf, it's very often using water-related terms. So it's diving and floating and whatever. It looks for an existing procedure with that name, and now it's starting to create that procedure. So, and that is the first version, and I'm going to stop the video in a second. When I scroll down, I can navigate through the code while it is still generating it. And so we see here that it looks all like good, hopefully working ABL code. Still all with green background, so that is the diff feature built in. I see the code that's generated by Windsurf, and I can accept it or not. When I make modifications to existing code, I can accept it basically on block by block or line by line. But we see this code is already like a file on disk, and the cable extension has started analyzing it. And it's showing me that here on the for each line of order, I'm seeing a lint error message. So that's coming out of cable. And just a second later, it's going to fix that automatically. And if you read on the right-hand side what it tells me what it's been doing, it will be telling there was a linting error and I've just fixed it. And then it's done. So then I looked at the code, and for the purpose of demo, I wrote a small procedure. Most of our code is class-based, so a lot of our programming rules are not taken into account here. I realized it did add a transaction block around the read code. And now I'm saying, well, you know, it's only performing read operations. We don't need that. Please fix that and remember that. This remember that is then creating a rule called memory, so that the next time it's going to do something similar, it's not going to make that same mistake again. So it's fixing the code now. So now say, okay, good. This is a procedure that directly accesses the database. I probably would have been happy with that code 10 years ago, but we're now doing all class-based code. So my next prompt is saying, okay, well, this wasn't that bad, but please turn the database access into code that uses our ORM wrapper. ORM wrapper is a concept in object-oriented programming where you wrap access to data in the database into usage of objects and objects that represents the data. So I say, well, use our ORM wrapper. And for that, he needs to understand which class to use for the table order and order line. And I tell him, well, you know, we have an MCP server that supports this process. An MCP server is a tool that we can plug into an AI agent. MCP is a standard protocol for that purpose. And we're just providing that as extra knowledge. I think for this, MCP is the right thing to do because it's dynamic. We may be changing that, and we may want to share this data with other developers. But at the end of the day, knowledge like that you can also provide to AI processes just through text files. And we'll have that in another demo in a couple of minutes, where I'm creating a markdown text file with instructions like that. So now we see the diffs that have been made by the tool, and I can go through that. The green is new code, red is code that is taken out. The for each goes away, and instead we're now using our order dataset model, which is one of the classes which is part of our ORM wrapper. And well, that code is acceptable. So one bit that was important in the beginning, it needed to know the database schema. AI can only make as good decision as it has information. So sometimes it's just guessing. If it understands how two tables in our database are linked to each other, it may just be very successful in guessing how the link between two other tables. So if it knows how to go from order header to order line, it probably knows how to go from invoice header to invoice line as well, if in our application we have a certain naming pattern. It can look in existing source code. It can read the DF file, which is also just a text document. Any other form of text documents, like we could be producing markdown documents with that knowledge, or more dynamically, more interactively using an apt hoc server that actually runs a query against the database in the framework where we have such information. Yeah, I already spoke about that. While the generation, it had this linting error. And when cable kicked in with the linting error, the AI agent corrected itself. Second video, I'm going to go through that a little bit faster. Very often in business applications and commercial applications, you need to know about public holidays. And in Germany, and I think in most European countries, most public holidays are either a fixed date, like national holidays, the French national holidays, the German Independence Day, whatever, that's always a certain date. Most Christian holidays are calculated relatively to Easter. So, which Sunday is X weeks after Easter, and so on. So knowing when Easter is can help calculating all these public holidays. Okay, so my prompt is, well, create a procedure, get Easter date in the demo folder that receives the year and returns the date of Easter Sunday in that year. And I don't have to explain the algorithm. It's just, I wouldn't say it's common sense, because that would mean every human would need to know that, but it is well documented. So, and it comes up with a procedure with that. And also here, we run into a compile error because it creates a number of variables, IA, IB, IC, ID, IE, and IF is just not acceptable as a variable name. So we could make that part of the coding guidelines that we provide to the AI, but here the compiler gave an error message saying that IF cannot be used as a variable name because it's a keyword, and it just replaced it into ifactor F. Which actually is more meaningful, and maybe I should now tell it to fix the rest as well. And now it's seeing that it probably took the code from whatever other Wikipedia page or whatever with mod as an abbreviation for the modulo code page, and then again cable kicked in and it fixed that, and now using automatically it's using the fully spelled out keyword. Then my next prompt, I asked for creating a test procedure. And when I ran that, the output said, well, this year, Easter Sunday is the 5th of April, which is correct, which I actually tested in my calendar. So when we look at the tool like Windsurf, there is a lot of functionality in the IDE, a lot of functionality that runs locally on your PC. But a lot of the magic, all of the intelligence, all of the decisions, whatever, they're done by LLMs. The LLMs are usually hosted in the cloud. Very often for programming tasks, we're using LLMs from Anthropic, Claude. Sonnet is very popular. Claude Opus, quite expensive, popular. The GPTs from OpenAI, and so on and so on. Google Gemini is like the rising star there since a couple of months only, while Claude Sonnet and ChatGPT have been there since the beginning of last year. Windsurf has its own models, and all these models, they have the different strengths, and just very short, they can be more successful with more complex tasks, or just with simple tasks. They can be explaining better why they do something. They have differences in performance. And that shows in the price tag. If I look at the screenshot here, you see there a factor on the right-hand side. That is just the price factor. And you charge tools like Windsurf typically for a monthly subscription per developer. And with that monthly subscription, you get a number of tokens. And it's hard to predict which task will need how many tokens, but based on which LLM you use, you consume more or less, but you get better and faster results versus smaller ones. We have developers in our team that are really think about for different tasks to use different LLMs. Writing unit tests, writing documentation is more trivial than doing complex refactoring and so on. I typically always go with a Claude Sonnet 4.6 low syncing or with a ChatGPT 5.3 low syncing. They, for me, provide a very good balance between speed and quality. Windsurf has a couple of weeks ago introduced something which I actually find a little bit obscene, the arena mode. So large language models, LLMs, are very energy intensive. So a lot of the price for using them is actually paying for the electricity bill of the LLM provider. With the arena mode, you can run the same task against 2 LLMs for the cost of 2, of course. What Windsurf promises with this is, well, when you run the same task against 2 parallel models, each working with its own checkout of the code base in Git, and then you say which one worked better. That helps you very neutrally to figure out which tasks is the best LLM. But again, I find the cost of that and maybe also the economic aspect of that a little bit obscene. So I've just used it for playing with it. So let's go to the next contestant, GitHub's Copilot. So GitHub's Copilot is like the main coding agent when you start VS Code, because it's already there. VS Code is a product from Microsoft. Microsoft has acquired GitHub, so it's basically all within the same corporation. GitHub Copilot, both from Microsoft, it's built into VS Code, but it feels and behaves very similar to Windsurf. There are differences. I'm going to talk a little bit about the differences in a bit. They both have the autocomplete feature. They both have a chat feature, just different names for the same thing. I have the feeling that Windsurf knows more about my code base, but I'm also honest enough to say that maybe it's just that I'm more used to how Windsurf reacts, and I'm expecting that is the norm. And Copilot just behaves a little bit different, without saying whether it's better or worse. GitHub Copilot is also built into the GitHub website. So if you go into a GitHub repository and you switch to the Agents tab, you actually have a chat window there, and you can give it their tasks. Here I said it's more like a documentation task. Draw me a mermaid diagram with base class and interfaces, including key methods and properties of the consulting regulation serializable class. And then this runs and gives you a summary. So the feedback that I get, the reasoning, what it did and why and how, is actually very similar to what we've seen in Windsurf when the chat window was flickering through on the right-hand side. Here, I get that in a website. And the result is here a markdown document with a mermaid diagram included, nice class diagram of that class. If I would want more related classes, I could have instructed that. And if you see that, what you're getting here with your AI coding assistant free of charge, you really don't need an UML diagramming tooling only for documentation. You might want to use UML tools for planning of the development, but just for document purposes, AI is doing that just like that. So, and then we have VS Code, the tool in the IDE, Copilot in the IDE. And if you take just a very quick look at this compared to Windsurf, and I've purposely used a bright color scheme in Windsurf and a dark one in Copilot just to see the difference. But that's actually not required. I could also use the same style sheets here, and then I would have to look at the icon on the top left on the window, whether this is Copilot or VS Code with Copilot or Windsurf. It looks so the same, and from there you just have to look into details. What is the difference between those? Windsurf is really right now targeting working with the developer hand in hand in the development environment. And Copilot can do that too, but other tools like Copilot and Google's Antigravity have a bigger focus on agents that execute work for us more autonomously. Larger tasks, maybe parallel tasks, and maybe tasks that you run in a cloud rather than on your local PC. If those tasks would get that long that we're talking about hours and not minutes, I just might not want to run this on my PC because it will have some impact on the load on my PC. And at the end of the day, I don't want to have to consider, oh, I'm not able to shut down my PC at the end of the day because it's still doing work. I just want to shut down my PC. And that's when running tasks in the cloud has benefits, and maybe it's also going to scale better when we run multiple stuff in parallel. It has some impact on the infrastructure. It means that you will have to have your source code in a Git provider, typically GitHub, in the cloud. So where your code lives is something that decides what and how you can use AI tools. On the right-hand side, we see the tab of the supported LLMs in Copilot, and it's with the exception of Windsurf's own LLMs, it has the support for the same GPT or Gemini or Claude LLMs. One thing that is there in Copilot, but not in Windsurf, is this auto feature, where based on the tasks that I give it, it's going to decide which LLM to use, a way of cost optimizing, and it gives us a 10% discount on the credits there, because Microsoft has to buy in the LLM usage from Anthropic, from Google, from OpenAI. Microsoft doesn't own any of these AIs itself. And with this is a picture from the Copilot documentation. You can decide by which kind of agent and where you run the agent, how interactive, how non-interactive you want to be, how local, how remote the execution should happen. And like I said earlier, in the cloud, you probably can scale better. One thing that I learned a little bit the hard way, but it had a good end last week at a customer. They are using Copilot, and their IT department had turned on pretty restrictive control over what they can do with it. So they've actually been waiting for 2 weeks to get their IT department to whitelist the OpenEdge MCP connector for ABL. So just as a little hint, if you're also dealing with a rather restrictive IT department and you want to start using AI coding tomorrow, you might have to discuss with them whether or not the OpenEdge MCP connector and other tools in that space are dangerous, or whether the productivity gain wins. So let's look into a little bit refactoring using these code and Copilot. So I do have a very simple screen built in the app builder. It's actually 2 screens, not very fancy, and actually not fully programmed out. I've used the database table in the Sports 2000 database that I haven't used, that I'm not using with all of my demos. That means I don't have a business entity for that yet. It has a browse. The browse has a query on the bin table joined with the item and the warehouse, and it shows some fields of the item and the warehouse as well. It has some fields here. The bin num field is not editable because its value is provided by a trigger, and we have a trigger, a safe trigger, which actually just does some validation here. Then there's a menu item, and the menu item runs a dialog, which is this dialog. And on the OK button of the dialog, I'm doing a mini report. It's going through the bin table and just calculating how many items of that item number, maybe filtered by warehouse, I have on stock or not. And this code could be 10 times more complex. It doesn't matter. The runtime will increase a little bit, but the runtime does not increase linear. The bigger the task gets, the faster the AI gets. But what have we done with this? So I went in Copilot and said, well, at the end of the day, I want to use business entities for all my database access. So I need to know where I stand. So using the MCP server, create a markdown document with an overview formatted as a table of all the tables of sports database, and the columns there are table name, description, and the name of the business entity that deals with this. And the business entity information should be obtained from that MCP server. And then it runs and it checks, and I think there are like 30 tables in the sports database, and it makes a tool call through the MCP server, basically querying our framework for all the database tables, whether or not we already have business entity data. On the right-hand side, we see the positive result. When I'm doing that for the order line table, it confirms me that there is a business entity for that. Then it confirms me that it created this markdown document, and this is the document. You can open markdown documents nicely in VS Code or other viewers. This is kind of like helping me to plan. So if I'm starting like a new refactoring of a new module in the application, I may need to know how much of the new code is already there, because when I find validation for those tables, I don't want to add it to a new business entity. I want to add additional validation code into the existing business entities and so on. Good. So then I say, well, look at this window program. Which database tables are there? Create a markdown document named refactoring plan in the same folder that lists those database tables that do not have a business entity yet. So here I say, hey, what is on my shopping list? What is still to be done? And it finds the 3 tables. I found 3 database tables referenced in the file bin, item, warehouse, and I resolved business entity availability for each of these tables via the MCP server. Good. Again, the MCP server is here, our implementation in the framework, but if a human would keep track of this mapping between database tables and business entities in a planning document yourself, you could also just refer to this document and would basically create using Delta that's still needed. And that's then the outcome. And then I, as the application architect, want to remain in control of the names and the folders where we create these business entities to. So I fill in the blanks in this document. AI helps me there a little bit with completion. You see the name warehouse business entity, it's being guessed by Copilot pilot there.
Sorry,
and that with that, Peter?
Sorry, just Vim had a comment. There's a share something dialogue that's overlaying the bottom of your screen, so it's covering every now and then, covering some stuff up. If you can, yeah, that guy. Thank
okay.
you.
I was hoping that you don't see that. Thank you for the remark. So, so I remain in control. So I do the planning of the new application structure, and I let the AI do the work. So when I've done that, my next prompt is, while using the MCP, so create business entities. In the Smart Component Library framework, a business entity is a construct that can have like 20 different files. They include files for each of the temp tables, for the data set. There's a main business entity, there's the data access class, a lot of helping bits and pieces. And we have decided that for the foreseeable future, we're not going to trust AI to build this complex construct. AI would probably build something that would work, but I want it to be always the same. And this always the same, this predictability, this deterministic behavior, that's something which is difficult to achieve with AI. So we integrate existing code generators into the AI process, again, through MCP. And then it's doing this, and when it's executing this prompt, it, as part of the confirmation of that's flickering through the chat window on the right-hand side, it's telling me, okay, well, I'm running now the business entity generator, the name of the business entity, bin business entity, in that package, demo AI refactoring warehouse bin that I put into the planning document earlier. And I did put package name and class name in one field, and the AI is, of course, smart enough to split that apart. And it has found in the browse the two other fields that were shown in the browse widget, the item name from the item table and the warehouse city table. So that's that is already extremely helpful. And the confirmation of our generator tool is saying, yes, I've created that business entity, or it would show an error message, and depending on the type of error message, AI would try to fix it or so. And then it gives me the confirmation and in more detail. And we see the temp table has been generated not by AI. AI has instructed our traditional tool to do so. But we see a field for the item name and the city from the warehouse. And it has generated validation code in the business entity. And we see there are two types of validations being added to this method. My prompt said the fields that are read-only on the screen, not editable on the screen, we should validate here for read-only. That's happening in line 95. And then we have the validation code that was verifying against screen values in the .w file. That's now properly verifying against the matching business entity temp table field names with the same error message and so on and so on. And this, again, works with much more complex samples. So then the next bit of functionality in that screen is we have the report about the quantity on stock for that item. And that's also relatively common when we start doing that. We say, well, there's this report menu. So my context, I'm not saying which file I talk about. It's just picking this context from the previous prompt. From the report menu, inspect the menu item about the item quantity report that most likely runs another .w. Create a parameter object from the fields in that frame. And do not use prefixes such as fi underscore when naming properties there. Then create a business task from the OK button, trigger receiving the parameter object as the input and returning an integer holder with the quantity value. I've done this here as a very specific prompt, but going forward in a modernization project, we'd be standardizing prompts like that, and then we could always get more shorter and basically say, hey, do this like we've done so many oftentimes before. So what's the resulting code? So this is the parameter object. It's a class with properties that hold values, and the property names and the data types and all that stuff have been determined from the existing dialog. And this is now the business task that implements a class, implements a method with that calculation of the item quantity on stock. And part of my prompt was saying, hey, makes it a REST method that I can invoke using post to that endpoint. That is ready to use. I could now immediately go into Swagger and test this code. And throughout this whole sample, I haven't modified a single line of ABL code myself, and there weren't any compilation errors. So, and when going through these prompting exercises, then the next step is to make these prompts reusable, more generic, almost like programming APIs. These prompts, when I plan work on a feature like that, I usually don't put the prompt straight into the chat window. My prompt tool is going to be a Jira ticket. I write these steps down in a Jira ticket, and then I tell the AI to implement that Jira ticket. That's what I'm going to show you in Dev in a couple of minutes. The different AI coding tools like Windsurf, Copilot, Claude Code, etc., they all use a slightly different structure, names for these files where you define these prompts as rules or workflows or skills. There's some standardization going on. there's a website called agent.md that's an attempt to standardize description of what an AI coding agent should have, like basic rules and features and so on. And I'm expecting that in the next couple of months, there'll be more and more standardization there. The good thing is in VS Code, you can just say, hey, I've been using Windsurf in the past, so we have this business anti-validation rule in Windsurf. Please import that to your rule set, and it will just do that. So then we have Google Antigravity, just very short. It's a fork of Windsurf from mid-2025. So it's a fork of the fork of VS Code. History behind that is last summer, Google obtained the intellectual property rights on the Windsurf product for $2.4 billion. So round about 2 point whatever billion euro. The resulting product is Google Antigravity. So logically, there's still a lot in common with Windsurf, but the focus is different. The focus of Antigravity is to actually become the front end for Google's Gemini cloud processing, and where Windsurf is mainly focusing on working with the developer hand in hand on the developer's desktop with these Google Gemini cloud service. Google is moving the processing more into its cloud, and then probably targeting even bigger refactoring tasks, like I spend weeks defining all the rules, and then, hey, take a huge ERP system and good luck with it, and we look for the result a couple days later. So now let's look into the OpenEdge MCP connector. So what we actually see here, we have a robot whispering to another robot, and that's actually like what the OpenEdge MCP connector is doing. The OpenEdge MCP connector supports AI coding agents with knowledge about the ABL language. It provides an indexed access to the language, and it's not a traditional text index. It's being stored in a Chroma vector database. So it's not really, you're not just searching, or it's not just searching for word matching. It's understanding similarity of words and meaning of words and stuff like that to give better search results. You need to be careful. We're talking here about an MCP server named the MCP connector, which is different from the OpenEdge MCP server for ABL. And I know this is just leading to confusion, and there are bits and pieces in the progress documentation where they're also making this mistake. So the OpenEdge MCP connector is really the language reference optimized for AI processes. It's based on the MCP protocol, and MCP is like the USB-C of AI. It's plug and playing of tools into other AI tools. I've given some webinars last year where I went into more detail about MCP. I'm probably going to give an update of such a webinar later this year. This provides, the OpenEdge MCP connector provides language reference in 2 collections for 12.2 and 12.8. There's some differences. The var statement, for instance, is not going to be in the language reference for 12.2. It's going to be in the 12.8 reference, and so on and so on. Progress will probably not provide that for 11.7 anymore, because 11.7 is retired since almost a year now. And it does not provide it for 13.0 yet. I don't know whether there are plans to do that or whether that's going to happen with the next LTS release. But as of now, the few new language features in 13.0 are not going to be documented there. It's not that bad. The AI coding assistants are pretty good with generating ABL also without the MCP connector, but it just makes it a little bit better. Yesterday, there was a webinar from Progress Software about modernization projects, and actually all the Q&A in that webinar was about questions for this, and I'm going to pick up some of these questions here and give my own answers for that. So one of the first questions that many people seem to be having is it free? Yes, it's going to be, or it is free for now, as long as you're under active maintenance. Yesterday, they said it needs to be 12.8 maintenance. I would be assuming that when I have a 13.0 under maintenance, I would still be able to use this, but details to be discussed with Progress. The AI coding assistants that you're using this within. They typically require subscription. So, and most of these AI coding assistants, if you're starting with small subscriptions for individual developers, you're somewhere in the range of $30, $40, $50 a month. And once you go into enterprise features with more governance and maybe ability to integrate more local tools, etc., then the stuff gets more expensive. But so AI coding assistants, they typically cost money. So where can you get it from? Well, there is a post in the CVP forum. So the entry barrier is you need to sign up to the CVP, the Community Validation Program on Progress Communities, and they find a pinned post introducing how to get it done. So do you need to register? Yes, you need to register to a Progress Cloud website and obtain an API key. The API key is unfortunately only valid for 90 days. It used to be 2 weeks when they started it. So 90 days is already like very, very nice of them. That means every 3 months you have to revisit that website and obtain a new API key. So is the MCP connector an AI coding assistant on IDE? No, it's just a tool that makes these tools better in understanding ABL language. Does it work on any AI coding assistant? It's always difficult to say yes to any, but any that I tried. So as long as they support MCP, it should. So all these VS Code extensions or VS Code and its fork, that works. There's a Python script for command line-based tools, which works nicely in Devon and Claude Code and in Mistral vibes. So it should, because MCP is really the standard that all of these tools support. Does Progress receive access to my source code when using this? No. The coding assistant uses the MCP connector to obtain language reference, not my code, my source code. So the coding assistant, which has access to your code, will ask the MCP connector, hey, give me all the keywords of the display statement, or what are the keywords of the for each statement, and stuff like that. And that's a question, and the answer is the condensed version of the language reference. So with what happens to your source code and who gets maybe access to your source code, that's something that you need to look at with when you talk about which AI coding agent you use. So I tested it in these environments, Windsurf, where the extension that Progress provides for using the MCP connector in VS Code Copilot, in Google Antigravity. I've used it in Devon through this Python MCP proxy command, Claude Code, and Mistral Ripe. And that gives me a pretty good confidence to say it should work everywhere. Here are the links to it, to the Progress documentation, and within the documentation, you find the link to the Progress Community CVP post where you can find the download. And the second link is the one to the websites that you need to sign up to for obtaining your API key. My personal opinion is Progress is doing a lot to protect language knowledge, that everybody could just download the PDF files from Progress website without signing up and import them into their own language reference MCP service. But well, it is what it is. We have to live with this fact that we need to generate new API keys every 90 days. The configuration of this MCP server, you need to introduce the MCP server to the coding tool that you're using. That's specific on the tool. In Windsurf, Antigravity, VS Code, there's the possibility of this configuration specific for user on my PC. In VS Code and Claude Code, you can make it part of the project configuration. That means it's shared with different developers. The JSON file that contains this, it's always very similar. It is a JSON file that can define multiple MCP servers. It has a name, the comment that executes it, and additional arguments there. You see here, it's actually executing a Python script that knows how to communicate with the cloud-based implementation. If for whatever reasons you cannot use this, Progress provides on the ESD website a download called the AI Coding Assistant ABL Syntax and Rules. That's a collection of markdown files that you can use as an alternative. With these files, you would then instruct through the rules in VS Code or Windsurf or whatever to look for ABL syntax related questions into these files. I expect it to be a little bit slower. I haven't done A/B comparisons, but the indexing in the MCP connectors within a vector database that's optimized for that, I can hardly believe how it's going to be not faster than using the local files. But when you're using that, like with the MCP tools that I've had in my earlier samples, you can also see what's happening. So if I ask a question like using the ABL MCP, so what's the syntax of the assign statement? It will run queries text. It will translate this prompt. And I had an example where I was actually doing a German prompt and it's translating the German here in English. That's happening then within VS Code or Windsurf into an actual query issued against the MCP server, and it gets then various text, and the response that's coming back is quite long. Here's the German one. So in German, with the help of the OpenEdge ABL, how do I display today's state? The answer is then, well, I do message today is the result of the today function. So quick look into Devin, the stepbrother of Windsurf, both owned by the same company, Cognition. It's a cloud-based AI development environment designed to run larger tasks in the cloud. It has a code wiki. There's a virtual machine there. There's VS Code in the browser there. And it integrates with many other tools that we have, Jira, GitHub, other Gits in the cloud. GitHub was the first here, and I'm expecting that to be true for many others. They're going to be all GitHub first. One of the cool features here is the Devin Code Wiki, the Deep Wiki, that is an indexed knowledge about your application based on making the application available through Git repos. When I work with a new application, since I'm using Devin, I'm always asking the customer for permission to load their application source code into Devin, because that allows me to answer questions. So here's a little wiki. I go into an application, Progress GUI, mix of ADIM1 and ADIM2. The application source code is in German, so German field names, German database names. I ask an English question, where's the customer discount calculated in this application? And this is now in real time. The earlier videos, I edited out a little bit of the thinking time, but this is really in real time. And it's showing me code samples on the right-hand side and the explanation on the left-hand side. For similar questions like where's VAT calculated in this application, we actually took the time and verified it manually that it finds all the cases. And yeah, you may guess that it's also quite good at guessing with abbreviated field names and stuff like that. These AI processes understand human language, natural language, almost as good as a human. And that also means then finding out that KD is an abbreviation for Kunde, which is a German word of customer, and so on and so on. So that's the Code Wiki feature in Devin. Very valuable when you're starting a modernization and you want to know, hey, where are the 10 different places in my application where I'm calculating prices? Because as a result of the modernization, I want to have one centralized price calculation routine. So you need to find these bits, these places in the application. So that is actually a ticket, a real ticket that had to be done. Some refactoring in one of our tools, a Jira ticket that describes what needs to be done. And all I do to trigger Devin is I added the label Devin to this ticket. And then it takes a minute or two. Then Devin comes back to me and says, hey, I'm Devin. I'm now researching this task, and I'll be back with a proposal. And all that triggered by just adding the Devon label. I could also assign it to a virtual Devon user. And then after a couple of minutes, it comes back to me and says, well, you know, this is how I understood the task. This is what I understand is the existing code, and this is my solution strategy. And it tells me whether or not it feels confident with it or not. This confidence level, most of the time, I really don't care, because even when Devon says I'm not really confident, the results are pretty good. But sometimes it says, you know, something in your instructions didn't make sense. Should I change that? In this case, whether the event was static or non-static. And I said, well, yeah, Devon, you are correct. Static event is fine, blah, blah, blah. And once I add this comment to Jira, it's going to re-investigate the task and eventually come back with follow-up questions. And at any time, I could say, well, this leads nowhere. I should better do it myself or assign it to a human colleague. Work through Jira comments on Devon's understanding of what to do, or just say, hey, we're good to go. Let's do it. So, and when I say that, this is running in the browser outside of my normal development environment. It has basically translated the solution discussion into one prompt based on that ticket, and now Devon makes the code changes. It is going to check out the GitHub repo. It's going to make a branch. It's going to make the code modifications. It's going to be verifying itself. I can follow what it's doing, but sometimes these tasks take minutes, and that's like what you do before you go into a conf call, and after the conf call, you check whether you've received the emails with the instruction to review the pull request. When it has submitted the code to Git, when it's done, immediately Jenkins will start building that branch. That for us with execution of around about 20,000 unit tests will take 20 minutes. So after 20 minutes, I will know whether the code has violated any existing unit tests or whether a new unit test failed. And in parallel to waiting for the unit test result, I can now look at the modified files like a GitHub pull request provided by a human developer and make comments that, hey, this event is actually static, and for a static event, it doesn't make sense to have the progresslang object sender parameter. I just do that as a comment in the pull request, and I make another one. I actually made 3 or 4 here, but I edited some out. And then I submit the changes back to Devon. And then Devon would be refining the pull request based on my comments. And my experience is that many tasks we do this way are good instantly. Some tasks take 1, maximum 2 iterations with pull request comments. There have been tasks where I gave up and said, okay, Devon, what you started is okay, but before I describe what you need to change in that result, I pull the changes into my local workspace and do it manually or go on with Windsurf from there or Copilot. I'm always in control for how long I let Devon do that. Devon also uses the OpenEdge MCP connector. So in the settings, in the integrations, there's the MCP marketplace. They can create custom MCP servers. And the OpenEdge ABL MCP server here, based on progress documentation for doing that, is a standard IO type MCP server executing the Python command with the path to the MCP proxy.p. So I just had to copy the Python file into Devon's environment and register it that way, and then it works. One cool feature in Devon is when I correct Devon in the pull request, Devon decides automatically to add stuff to its knowledge. So it says, okay, Mike has corrected me, so I better not make the same mistake next time. I'm also in control of that. When I go into the Devon environment, I see proposals for new knowledge entries, and I can say, yes, they're good or not. Yeah, we test that with our Jenkins, and But generally, also Devin rarely creates code that doesn't compile at all.
Mike, sorry,
Yeah.
before you move off Devin, Vim had a question about Devin pricing. I don't know how deeply you want to go into that.
Yeah, well, Devin is not. Well, Devin has different price options. The price option that I use is the pay-as-you-go option, which is not a monthly subscription. You pay starting from $20 or $50 or $100 virtual computing units or ACUs, artificial computing units, whatever. And when they're used, Devin, you can configure Devin to automatically charge you more. Or it will stop then until you manually charge more. So it's like putting money into the parking meter. That's the price that I'm doing. And for instance, the Beckelman application and the Smart Component source code, I have them in Devin since half a year. While that code sits there in the code wiki, I'm not consuming any ACUs. That is really for free. Devin is really for occasional usage a very cost-efficient solution. There are enterprise versions. There's a team plan, which is $500 a month, which makes sense when you have a team of developers that really use it for day in, day out writing code there. But I think for playing with it, the pay-as-you-go is really good. And I'm not paying hundreds of dollars each month for Devin. I think the last time that I put money into Devin parking meter was a couple months ago, and I'm using it occasionally. Since Windsurf has become much better since, I don't know, October in running larger tasks, I've used Devin less, but I'm still occasionally doing that. So Mistral. So far, all the products, well, with the exception of Riverside's VS Code extension for OpenEdge, have been American tech companies. And well, unfortunately, the current political climate makes you wonder whether it wouldn't be smart as a European company to rely more on European products. And with that, Mistral is kind of like the rising star on the AI horizon. A French startup founded 3 years ago from people coming from DeepMind and Meta. It's based in Paris. The one thing that they do different, besides being fully European and having no dependency on the big American tech companies, is they release some of their models and some of the tools also as open source, and developers can freely download and modify them. I must say, I still consider myself being a software architect and not a data scientist. The last thing I want to do is modify an AI model. I never had to do that, and I hope that for the rest of my career I don't have to do that, but they give you the option. The models are also quite good and performing well. They also have commercial products, APIs. You can use the Mistral LLM also in applications. And they position themselves as a European alternative to the US tech giants, with an emphasizing on data sovereignty. They do have kind of a zoo of tools. So the first time I looked at their website, it was really a bit confusing. For developers, the tool that I'm going to show you is called Mistral Vibe. It's a command line-based coding assistant, very similar to Claude Code. Claude with an A, not with an O. Claude Code. They do have a Mistral Enterprise Code tool, which requires a different subtool. I haven't tried that. I just tried Mistral Vibe, and it's also quite good for certain tasks. So it's command line based. What does it mean? Is you're using on Windows the good old Windows terminal, the DOS box, the cmd.exe, however you want to call it, to start it after installation with the Vibe command. And then you have there with the /help access to various functions, also configuration, etc. But you also have a prompt window there. And I said, well, which of the methods of that class is the longest? And it's now going through the code. Some of the things it tries fail because I don't have the Unix tools installed in my Windows, apparently. The same happens in Copilot and VS Code. They also sometimes try to run bash tools just in case I have them installed. But it told me, well, this save partial changes method is the longest with approximately 100 lines, which includes the comment, but nevertheless. And I said, okay, show it to me. And then you can scroll through it and look through it. And then I say, well, there's a block named buffer loop, moves that into its own method. I give a name. I want to be in control of my names. I don't say which parameters, nothing. I only say that block of code should go into its own method. Now it's working. It's going to ask me for permission to make these changes. Yes, go on. And it shows me the diffs there. I've never been a fan of this diff output in a terminal window. It finds out that there's now an unused variable that it's going to take away. It's going to confirm me what it did. And my last prompt is, well, show me the new method. And also here, I don't have to say the name anymore. It knows what it did before. That's part of the context. I just can say, hey, the new, the previous, whatever. And now I can scroll up and look through what it did. Claude Code from Anthropic, which is more like the big established command line-based coding assistant, behaves very similar. And both tools run on Windows and on Linux, and probably also on the Mac. And also here you can configure the MCP connector. I must admit it's the first time that I've seen a file with the extension TOML, Tom's whatever markup language. And they say it's easier to read for humans and easier to process for computers, which I would not sign with. But you see here, you also configure that MCP server, standard IO transport, Python command, and a path to that executable. And that's it. And based on that, it has also access to that. So now I'm coming to the end. Some lessons learned, and it's actually the same lessons learned a couple months ago at similar webinars. That really hasn't changed that much. So this tooling changes fast. Since December, for instance, Google Antigravity was everywhere in the news. And as a result of that, development teams have been asked by their managers, hey, we need to do something with Antigravity. We can trust that Google stays around for quite a while, but what we don't know is whether next week there's another next hot kit that everybody wants to use too. So you really need to keep up with this. The large language models, there's almost every week, every second week, a new large language model. And keeping up with what their specialty is and the price, it's different. My conclusion is that, well, I've been using 20 years long Progress Developer Studio. So starting with when Progress released OpenEdge 10.1a, somewhere in the year 2005. And for most of the time, I've been quite happy. But I don't think that, well, hopefully I'll be retired by then, but I don't think that in 20 years from now, I'll still be using Windsurf. I'm just expecting that there'll be new stuff that I need to be using. I might be using different tools in combination. So maybe for different tasks, I'm going to be switching between Copilot and Windsurf. I have quite some sympathy for these command line-based tools. And want to try to integrate them more in my day-to-day workflow. So I think a developer, and if we look at many Progress developers that are still using the Progress procedure editor or the app builder, knowing that Progress Developer Studio has been around for the last 20 years and provides a lot of additional features, many developers are just based on habit using the development tools they've been using for long. With these AI tools, to really utilize that, you need to be ready to change them. The other thing that's changing is the role of a programmer. I mean, I don't know, it's hard to predict, but I would say that more than 80% of lines of code that I've been written in the last 12 months, definitely in the last 6 months, have been generated by AI, which sometimes also leads to the fact that I'm losing my routine. I remember that at one of the pack challenges last year, I've been typing a for each on a database table myself and defining variables, and I was forgetting the no undo statement, which is quite embarrassing. But it's just this muscle memory that you're losing. But the good thing is you can more focus on the big picture. You can more focus on the design of the solution, on translating users' requirements into technical requirements. Users' requirements into technical requirements, which for somebody with experience that knows how the result should look like is really perfect. I'm a little bit worried that if young programmers just learn from AI, you need to know a little bit better how the application should look like to tell the AI what to do and to rate the quality of what the AI does. So I think that's going to be a challenge, how we keep on training junior programmers, turning them into senior programmers and architects to really use AI efficiently. I'm really convinced we still need humans for writing applications and maintaining applications. It's also kind of like who takes responsibility. AI doesn't take responsibility for its work. We need to be responsible, keep responsible for translating requirements into specifications and reviewing the code. And also for a junior programmer, being able to write a structured English, German, whatever language text of 3, 4, 5 paragraphs describing a solution is actually becoming more important than knowing all the keywords of the for each statement in and out. Yeah, young programmers and old programmers need to really get back to natural language. AI doesn't care about typos. I've been fixing some of my typos in the demos. I just do that because I still chat with humans a lot as well. And when I chat with humans, I want to be in the habit of, being at least a little bit typo-free. I strongly believe that frameworks are a big benefit when using AI. And that's not only because I'm selling a framework and developing a framework, but with a framework, you define architecture, standards, layers, best practices, you provide tools, you provide code samples, reference implementation, all the stuff that makes AI more successful. You provide tooling that can be integrated. Without a framework on all the best practices associated with a framework, Gen AI is a great way to produce lots of unmaintainable code much faster than before. So I think that's important. And the other thing which is important because you're producing more code faster, is QA tooling, unit tests. If you let AI change lots of code just because your coding standards or technical non-functional requirements change, well, that code needs to be tested. And the more unit test coverage you have there, the better for the confidence. Code quality checker tools like Cable from Riverside or the SIG's secret QSM offering are very important. We had consulting work. I was last summer at a developer conference in Berlin. And on the flight back from Berlin, I prepared Jira tickets and emails to our DevOps architect saying, we need to migrate from Perforce to GitHub, because I believe Perforce is the best SCM tool on the planet, but GitHub is going to give us the best support with various AI-based development tools. We plan to upgrade our Jenkins. Our Jenkins was running and outdated for years. Nobody took care to it because it was just running, but we knew we had to upgrade it at some point to better support integration with GitHub, to report build errors into GitHub pull requests so that the AI can see them there, and so on and so on. We upgraded our SonarCube server. It was for us not just this learning of the different AI tools and getting some confidence with prompting and seeing how far you can let AI go and when it would fail more likely. I mean, that's a big part of the getting used to it, but we also invested quite some time into our DevOps tool stack to be up to date. So something that we started doing end of last year, but more and more since the last couple of weeks, since the OpenEdge MCP connectors finally were available. We've worked with some customers already in a workshop format to enable their AI development, and we make these workshops tailored. We could make a week in a row. We could make 2 days here, 3 days there. We can do it remotely in different chunks, whatever fits best into everybody's calendar. We get the code into the AI development environment of choice. Is code Windsurf, Antigravity, whatever. Configure the workspace, have that discussion about SCM and DevOps, work on configuration of coding standards and rules, getting started with code refactoring. We've started with customers to implement the first custom MCP servers to better provide knowledge of the existing application into the thing and so on. And well, that's just something. If you need some guidance there, some support there, talk to us, and we'll see how we can help you there. Yeah, well, if you want to keep up with what we're doing throughout the year, and for instance, the dates of the upcoming spring Progress User Group conferences around the world and so on, and blog articles and tools, etc. I invite you to subscribe to our newsletter by going to that link or emailing Christina at marketing@consultingwork.com. And with that, Peter, are there any questions?
There's one that may or may not be outstanding. Ton asked about if you had worries about intellectual property of the code going into the LLMs. And I know you started addressing it when you talked a little bit about Devon. No, sorry, about the OpenEdge MCP connector. I don't know if you want to add, if you have anything to add into that.
Well, I can say 2 sentences there, but the first sentence I say, well, I already said what my favorite job description is: a software architect. I'm not a data scientist and I'm not a lawyer. So data privacy statements and all that stuff produce me a lot of headaches. The reason why I started with Windsurf 2 years ago was I read an article at that time already comparing Windsurf to GitHub Copilot and probably Cursor, because most of the other ones weren't there at that time already. And in terms of protection of both my intellectual property and making sure that into the models and the code generation process, nobody else's intellectual property is used, Windsurf was a clear winner. Well, that was 2 years ago. One change in ownership ago. Whether it's still the case, I don't know. Generally, I have always a tendency to trust companies that are not known for the fact that data is a primary business model more. Google is a company that's known for the fact that data is a primary business model, like Facebook and others. Microsoft is not necessarily known for that, but that's just my gut feeling. So what I mean with this, it's also with my emails, I feel my commercial emails being in better hands in Office 365 than they would be in Google. But it is a concern, and but also with having the source code in the Git in the cloud, whether it's GitHub or GitLab in the cloud or Bitbucket in the cloud, you give other organizations principally access to your intellectual property. It is a concern, but I'm really not qualified to give you an up-to-date comparison there between the typical subjects. Well, then I think we can conclude this. Thank you for your time. Well, keep up for announcements of A, the recording of this, and B, further webinars from Peter and myself and maybe others from the team. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thanks, Peter.
Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.